Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just returned from spending the weekend in Wyoming, talking to many people around the Cowboy State who are concerned about our nation, concerned about the growing debt, concerned about jobs and the economy, and the concern that Washington has taken our eye off of the ball. They also have considerable concerns about and questions specifically about the nominee to the Supreme Court, Elena Kagan. And I heard this when I was in Thermopolis, Wyoming, when I was in Sheridan, when I was in Casper. So what I want to do, Mr. President, is spend a few minutes discussing and questioning, if I would, the views on the Second Amendment of Elena Kagan. The Second Amendment in Wyoming, as you know, is nothing we take for granted. It is something that we hold very, very dear. We don't take it for granted because our lives depend upon it. The Second Amendment allows us to defend ourselves from harm. It also puts food on our tables. These are the values and the virtues that make this issue so important to Wyoming. And I understand that next week Ms. Kagan's hearings will begin. It is my hope that we will have a clear picture of where she stands on the right to keep and to bear arms. The window into her views is small. I hope that the hearing will open that window wider for the American people. Her clerkship to Justice Thurgood Marshall and the documents connected to her time in the Clinton White House only crack that window a little bit. I want to hear from her. Mr. President, I want to hear why Ms. Kagan recommended to throw out the Sandage versus the United States case from the Supreme Court. This is a case that involved an individual charged with possession of a handgun, and ammunition in the District of Columbia. In a one-paragraph recommendation to Justice Marshall, Ms. Kagan wrote, "The petitioner's sole contention is that the District of Columbia's firearms statutes violate his constitutional right to keep and bear arms." She went on to write, "I am not sympathetic." Now, I want to know why she was not sympathetic to Mr. Sandage. The Second Amendment explicitly says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, as we know today, Mr. President, the D.C. gun ban, the law, was clearly unconstitutional. The individual right to keep and bear arms has been affirmed by the Heller case. Mr. Sandage's rights were violated. Ms. Kagan had the opportunity to recommend that the court hear the case, but she did not recommend it. Was this recommendation a legal opinion, or was it a political opinion? The Second Amendment is pretty clear, Mr. President. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. During the Clinton administration, Ms. Kagan served as the Associate White House Counsel. The role of the White House Counsel Office is to provide the President with the best legal advice possible. Well, this is not a political office. According to a 1996 memorandum released by the Clinton Library, Ms. Kagan raised concerns that certain organizations would be exempted from liability under the Volunteer Protection Act. This legislation was aimed at providing protections to volunteers, to nonprofit organizations, and governmental entities in lawsuits based on the activities of volunteers. Well, Mr. President, in a memorandum that she wrote, she branded some of these organizations as bad guy orgs, O-R-G-S. I assume that's bad guy organizations. Well, the bad guy organizations that she was referring to, she listed as the Ku Klux Klan and the National Rifle Association. So in her capacity as counsel to the President, I want to know why she was concerned that the NRA, the National Rifle Association, would be covered in the Volunteer Protection Act. I want to know why she grouped a violent, racist hate organization with the NRA. The NRA, Mr. President, a national organization, chapters around the country, very active in Wyoming. It's an organization that teaches firearm safety. It advocates for Second Amendment rights. And again, this gets to the question of whether or not Ms. Kagan is able to separate politics from policy. Mr. President, we have seen Ms. Kagan's resume. Now we need to hear from her. So next week I look forward to hearing her testimony, and I also look forward to meeting with Ms. Kagan to discuss these issues and the importance of the Second Amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.